Pipeline balance. You see a pattern here with these circles. Your pipeline should be powerful, flexible. It should scale well. It needs to be reliable, something that won't fail, or when it does fail, has a mechanism for recovery that gets you back on your feet quickly. Transparent simply means that it's clear. Everybody has a clear view on the pipeline at every level. It should be current, up to date. Hopefully it should be cutting edge. Efficient, something where work flows through easily. And economical, something which is inexpensive to implement, use, and evolve. Serial pipelines, which we've been familiar with for a long time, is when one process passes data to the next process, and then that data is passed to the next process. So a modeler builds a model, says, here you go, texture painter, and the texture painter says, thanks, and he paints it, and here you go, animator. But each person waits to get that piece of data in a linear fashion. What's more effective is a parallel pipeline, where the people working in those three hypothetical processes, in this case, are writing data in and out to a central repository. So people are working simultaneously. This is nothing new. Hopefully everybody in this room is either using or familiar with the notion of a parallel pipeline. But I think it's something that can really be exploited more efficiently in many cases than it has been. I'm going to break down an entire show for you in one slide here, starting with the two sort of central cores of story and VizDev. Out of that, we have from VizDev design. Coming out of story, we have editorial and previs. And the names can be slightly different, so don't kill me over my terminology, but hopefully it's all registering in a common way. Your art packet then is created for use by the artist, and then from story, your workbook, right, which is basically the camera, etc. And then we go into production. So we have modeling and articulation. Articulation is a fancy word for rigging. Shading and illumination. I don't mean scene lighting here, but I basically mean your texturing and then sort of the lighting models, the global illumination that you may be using, subsurface scattering illumination of the characters and the props. Layout, animation, effects, lighting and compositing. These are all feeding into and drawing out of a central asset repository. And there's a coating of meta around the chewy asset center. The meta file is basically a text file which regulates the proxies that you're using, right? The different versions of data, the different levels of detail. Are we using old tree or healthy tree? Is this the low-res spike or the high-res spike, etc.? That wasn't my tooth. Then sprinkled in here, you have your screen tests. A screen test is basically an asset test. You build your model, you rig it, you have the animator, have the character walk in, kind of stand there, maybe do this. The director looks at it and says, that's my character. That's my girl right there. Good. Sweatbox, term Disney invented, I think, because the room was so hot, where you're evaluating your animation together. Color dailies, which is where everything's come together. You've got your final color, your effects, everything's looking wonderful, hopefully. This is your final approval. And then DCI, which is digital cut-in. Just cutting into your digital work reel, shipping it out, and you're good to go. Now what I did is, because I showed this to a producer once and they freaked out, they couldn't register it, is I took this same core and I made it into a more linear version. So it's the exact same data, just represented differently. So you see here, the same sort of spheres now sort of elongated and stacked. You still have your modeling and articulation and shaders feeding into the asset core. That stuff is read in by the shot departments. The shot departments write data back into the asset repository, and that in turn is drawn back into the asset producing departments. So for instance, if the skinning group has built a physique for a character and the animators start working with it and say, hey, the bicep is breaking down, it's good for those TDs to pull those shots in and actually use that as a test bed for fixing that problem. So people are writing in and pulling this stuff back out simultaneously and working the show up together in a gradual but concerted fashion. You see there's a nice sort of linear arrow that can be applied to those departments if you're into such things. And if your facility has the concept of sequences, Sony has sequence supervisors, for instance, Disney as well. You can see how sequences would apply to those shots, right? Each of those stripes is a different sequence supervisor in charge of a certain section of the show.